Join us for 3 days in Orlando, Florida in February 2025 for an event designed to equip IT professionals like you with the tools, knowledge, and strategies to navigate the ever-changing cybersecurity landscape. Secure your spot and register to join us for 3 days of immersive learning, collaboration, and skill building with hands-on hacking labs and much more.
It's good to be reminded of all of the threats that we face and the different ways that we're vulnerable.
You're only as strong as your weakest link, right? You can have all the tools that you want in place, but if you're not taking care of the end user, I think that's the weakest link there.
Network with peers from around the globe, share experiences, and learn from real-world case studies, all aimed at enhancing your capabilities as an IT professional. Register now for Zero Trust World 2025 and take the first step towards a more secure tomorrow.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Danny Jenkins here with ThreatLocker, and we've got Rob Allen. Rob, good morning.
Good morning, Danny.
Okay, so to begin, just before we actually begin, today's webinar was scheduled for an hour. We have reduced it to 30 minutes. If you may or may not know that there is a major hurricane heading towards our headquarters here in Orlando, so we've got a lot of prep to do. If you are an existing ThreatLocker partner, just to let you know, we do have backup plans in place, contingencies. We've shipped support staff out of site. We do have a category 4 rated building with backup generators and power, but we've also shipped people out of state to help with continued support and MDR services if the worst was to happen in Orlando. So we're going to keep this down to 30 minutes. Just a couple of housekeeping items. If you do have any questions, we're not going to get through them all today. Almost certainly Rob loves to take a lot of time on questions, but we'll answer as many as we can. Please throw them into the Q&A section. And
could I just say, Danny, I think the technical term is barreling towards us. It's not heading towards us, it is barreling towards us.
Yes, at 9 miles an hour at I-4 speed.
Fair.
It is barreling at 9 miles an hour. So, but yeah, we do have contingencies in place. Obviously, we are shutting down most of our office from noon today, so we need to make sure.
Show must go on.
Yes. Unfortunately, we don't get to go home and take a week off or 2 days off or a day off, because when hackers sleep, we get to sleep. That's the rule. Very grateful to our support team. You know, 2 days ago, we said, hey, we need to send 10 people to our Dublin office to make sure we continue to work out the Dublin office. So we put critical staff there. We sent some people out of state, and our team were very willing and very happy to assist and ensure that.
For anybody who's ever been in Ireland in October, they'll know it is basically like this right now. So people who've gone to Ireland voluntarily, I salute you.
Basically like this, and 30 degrees, 40 degrees cooler. Okay, so today we're going to talk about ring fencing and why ring fencing is so important as a security stack. It's one of the features we introduced really early on in ThreatLocker, and it has saved people's skin so many times when it comes to cyber attacks. And we often think about cyber attacks, we think about someone ran some bad software, someone opened an RDP port. What we don't think about is what's often referred to as fileless malware in memory attacks. The weaponize it, which is really what we're talking about here, is the weaponization of good tools on your machine. Every computer comes with more applications you can possibly imagine. Everything from ones you can think about, like Google Chrome, Zoom, Office, Teams, but also the ones you don't think about, like all of the tools that are built into Windows, like Register, RunDLL, C-script, PowerShell, command prompt, things that come driver support sets. When you look in that right corner and you see that tray, that's just a quarter of them. Every sound driver, every camera driver, all of these applications that run on your machine are potential vulnerabilities to your system. And the terrifying thing that most people don't think about is that every one of those applications has access to all of the data that the user has access to, they're logged in as. So if you are a finance guy and you've got access to finance files, that quick cam support app in the bottom right corner, that can see your data. It doesn't mean it will steal it, but it has the potential of being vulnerable, being exploited, or having a backdoor in it.
Can I just say something? I will hear no bad word said about the Logitech Quick Cam software, because it is what has enabled me to not look red on these webinars. So
Yeah.
I adjusted the settings on my camera so I no longer look like a stereotypical Irish person in Florida. So I will hear no bad words said about that Logitech software. It is awesome.
But you are red, Rob.
Uh, the camera would suggest otherwise, Danny.
Okay, I'm not a big fan of it because it makes me look 12.
Well, I was going to say, yes. I mean, one of us looks natural. The other one of us looks like a 12-year-old.
So it takes 20 years off. So, I want to talk about vulnerabilities first, how they're exploited, because and there's 3 risks with software on your machine. The first one is the least likely, which is a backdoor, where somebody has intentionally put code into that software to do something bad on your machine. We don't see that too often, but SolarWinds Orion being a good example. Now, that wasn't a backdoor created by SolarWinds, but we've seen Russian software. Kaspersky has at least been accused of putting backdoors in their software. SolarWinds had a Russian organization, lots of ties to Russia here. A Russian organization or Russian cyber criminals break into their business and inject malicious code into their code, and then they ship it out. But that's a backdoor. It's intentional. It was put in there, and it's set to cause harm. The other type of thing we're concerned about is a vulnerability. Now, a vulnerability is essentially a misused feature. So it's a bug in the code that will do something that it wasn't intended to do. So, for example, if you have a web portal and you have a login page, and that login page has a SQL command that says, I'm going to go and check the username against SQL, and they're not using something called parameters in SQL, it can give you what's called a SQL injection attack. So someone could change the SQL script, and we saw in 2021 with Kaseya, someone essentially inserted a row into a database to push out software. So you could use a vulnerability, a bug in the code. SolarWinds, not SolarWinds, sorry, Log4j was a vulnerability. Felina was a vulnerability. The Exchange server was a vulnerability. Now, the thing about vulnerabilities is in order for them to be effective, they first have to be exploited and receive data. So one of the things we do quite often, we do an onboarding report, and we'll show people which applications are running vulnerable versions of Log4j. And there's a lot. I don't know if I see many onboardings that don't have a vulnerable Log4j application. However, just because you have vulnerable code in your application, it doesn't mean the code can be exploited. In order for code to be exploited, it has to do one of 2 things. One is it has to receive data, but it can either receive it through a network call. So in the case of the Exchange vulnerability, the Exchange server has 443 open on the internet. The attacker connects to the internet server, and they push malicious code, they run fileless code into that open port, and they're able to do something. The other way it can ingest data is when you open a document or a file. So if you had a vulnerability in Office, for example, like Felina, when a user downloaded a file with a malicious payload in it, that malicious payload caused Office to crash, and then it could go and call PowerShell without any interaction from the user. So just because you have a vulnerable component doesn't mean it's exploitable. And I saw Log4j in a piece of wheel alignment software. There was no way that software could ingest data. So it was vulnerable technically, but it wasn't exploitable. And the third thing we want to think about when we're thinking about software that's malicious is the misuse of intended features. So a vulnerability essentially is an unintended feature, something that it does that the developer didn't intend it to do. But the third is, hey, I've got PowerShell. There is an intended feature in PowerShell to iterate through my documents or to for each, and there's an intended feature to be able to talk to the internet. And attackers could use that feature to upload your files to the internet, encrypt your files. WinRAR is another perfect example. You can encrypt files with WinRAR. It's very commonly used by ransomware groups to encrypt your files on your network.
Encrypt data, you can upload data. Technically, you can delete data as well. I mean, it has all the symptoms of ransomware.
This is where we want to talk about ring fencing, because how can we stop these things from happening? Because we have to accept that the software that we run can be used and weaponized against us. And the best thing to do is not run software you don't need. But the reality is sometimes we have to run software we don't, we need it. We need software, and it can still be used against us. Windows comes shipped with PowerShell. And while you can block it in many cases, it can't always be blocked because a lot of applications do use it. Redserve, Run DLL, Script, all really dangerous tools. We have to accept that there may be a backdoor or vulnerability in our QuickCam support app or Zoom or Office or anything we use. So we have to figure out how can we mitigate the risk and reduce that. So obviously, number one is patch your software. I had a customer said to me, I was stupid if I patched software once. I'm not exaggerating. A customer that had RDP open on the internet. So but patch it. It's not going to solve 0 days. But most attacks, probably 95% attacks, aren't done on 0 days. So make sure your software is fully patched. So if there is a vulnerability, a known bug in it, then it's not going to be able to be exploited. The second thing we want to think about is how can we remove an attacker's ability to exploit a vulnerability. And we're going to show you a little bit about ring fencing today. Now, there's 2 ways we can avoid it. One is we can stop the ingestion of data. And I'm not going to get into network control today, but I'll mention this very quickly. If you're using ThreatLocker and you're not using our network control component, and I think it's probably the most underutilized purchase component of ThreatLocker, go and utilize it, because if someone can't see an open port on your server, they cannot exploit a vulnerability, they cannot do a brute force. And very easily in ThreatLocker, you can go in and you can say, I'm going to create a new network policy that blocks all inbound traffic except this traffic. And when you create that exception, you say only allow traffic from my organization. And what that means is if there's a perpetrator on your network, if someone finds an open port on the internet, if you forgot to close your firewall, if you've got Exchange running, you won't be able to access that Exchange server except from a trusted device. The next thing we can do is ring fencing. I'm going to let Rob explain ring fencing at a high level first. Well, I set up some kind of demo on it.
So effectively, ring fencing is it's the second part of application control. So the first part is as Danny said, what can run and what can't run, which is really important because the less things are running, the less things are exploitable. Ring fencing is concerned with what things can do when they are running. So controlling applications, trusted applications behavior to, as Danny said, stop applications from being weaponized, stop things from being used against you. So there's a few different things that we can control with ring fencing. So we control application interaction. So which things can call which other things, because a lot of these attacks are application A calling PowerShell or calling Regserve or calling RunDLL or calling something else that is weaponizable. So if you can stop those initial interactions, those pieces of software talking to each other, you're going to stop a lot of these attacks in their tracks. But where ring fencing gets really interesting is when you start talking about what access to data applications have. So does PowerShell need to access my files? Does PowerShell need to access, as Danny said, the management share or the finance share? It doesn't need to. It can, and that's something that is utilized, obviously, by the bad guys because it's on every Windows machine. It makes sense to use it. So limiting hot access to files stops things from being used to exfiltrate or access or encrypt data. We can also control where things can go on the internet. So think of this like a firewall around your individual applications, controlling where they can and more specifically where they can't connect to, because not all software needs to connect to the entire internet. In fact, most software doesn't need to connect to the entire internet. So limit where it can talk to, limit where it can access on the internet. And again, you're going to massively reduce your attack surface. And we can also, with ring fencing, control access to the registry. So does software X need to access the registry? No, then block it from accessing the registry. So effectively controlling what applications can do.
I'm going to show you what that looks like in reality. Can you see that, Rob?
Yep, culture desktop.
Okay, there you go. So here's my list of applications. And whenever you deploy ThreatLocker, the first thing you're going to see is all of the applications in your environment. Now, what we realized early on is most companies don't have 62 applications. This is my nice, clean demo environment. Most companies have somewhere in the region of 300 to 3,000 applications. So there's a lot of data here to deal with. So we did a couple of things. One is we put the ability to put a rating. Now, we're not saying you shouldn't look at every application here, but the applications that we've determined as higher risk, you can sort by and you can filter. And you can see a health report here. Where is the health report gone now, Rob? It just keeps moving around. It's on the health center. Yeah, you can actually download a health report here. So you can see a health report here that actually gives you, here's some top things that you should be doing in your environment. And we'll actually show you these are the things we want you to prioritize. Now, like I said, the idea is we should look at every application, but our first goal is look at the higher risk applications. So in my environment here, I can see things here. I can also filter. So I could filter by category. So I could say things like, hey, I want to know any shopping tools, shopping tools that are in my environment. And if I click on this, I can see here that I've got a coupon clipper, Cooper, that is allowed in my browsers. It's made in China, and it can also see all of my passwords. And that's one of the permissions it actually requires to run. But I can also filter by other things. So I could say I want to filter by country. And just because we're going to pick on Russia today, because we talked about SolarWinds and we talked about Kaspersky, so I'll say, show me everything that's running in Russia. And it will say, here's everything that's running in Russia. So you go into your environment and you see this software. And the first thing you need to do is figure out, well, what is the risk with the software? And there's known risks and unknown risks. And with ring fencing, the nice thing is you're dealing with unknown risks as well. But in ThreatLocker, we've said that here's some known risks about 7-zip. It can be used for encrypting files, just like WinRAR can. It can be used for remote code distribution. It was made in Russia. We don't believe there's a backdoor in there, but that's the facts of the software. So maybe you've got this in your environment and you say, I want to use this software, but I want to limit its permissions. So what I can do here is very quickly go into the policy, and I can say, I'm going to remove this application's permission to talk to other applications. So what that means is it will not be able to run PowerShell. It will not be able to call Redshift. So if an attacker put a backdoor into it to talk to other applications, it simply won't be able to talk to them. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I don't want this to access any of my files. Now, if it's zip software and you genuinely want to zip your files, you're probably going to need to let it access your files. What you could do is allow read access to all files and then just write access to 7-zip. So I could say, I'm going to allow read access to all files, and I'm going to allow write access to 7-zip files because I want to be able to create 7-zip files with it. So you can limit the damage. Now, of course, if there was a backdoor in the software, it would still be able to take my files and steal them and send them out to the internet because now we've put read access in the file. But this is where we have the other restrictions. We could say I don't want it to change the registry. We can also say I don't want it to be able to access the internet except certain domains. Now, this is interesting because 7-zip has no ability, no features that I'm aware of that need it to talk to the internet. So just doing this means if there was a backdoor in the software, even though I've given it file access to read, it wouldn't be able to take those files and upload them to the internet. Very simple things. Now, I will say a lot of the time people say, I don't know what my application needs. I think it needs this, this, and this, but I cannot afford to take down my entire business or this line of business application because I want to limit its restrictions. And this is where you have the ability to put a policy in monitor only mode. So if I didn't know if this policy is going to break stuff, I can put that policy in monitor only mode. I can let it run for a couple of weeks, and then I can come into here and do a simulation of everything that would have been denied. And if I need to make exceptions, I can do. Let's get some questions answered, not all of them, but let's see if there's anything we can answer here, Rob. Do I need to replace my current AV or is this just additional security app? So I'll answer that question first. So throughout this, we're talking about ring fencing today, but ThreatLocker is a full endpoint protection platform, and that has allow listing, which blocks all untrusted software, ring fencing, network controls, EDR built into it. So yes, you can replace your existing AV or endpoint protection platform. It will also integrate. So we don't have this policy that, hey, it's also someone else. If you're running Windows Defender, we'll integrate with Defender to report on those alerts and configure Windows Defender for you. Most of our customers now are actually using our entire platform. If you want to say, well, I've already got an EDR I'm really happy with, but it doesn't do this, it doesn't stop untrusted software, and I know that there's going to be vulnerabilities, you can just say, I want to use ThreatLocker's ring fencing and application whitelisting abilities.
So Andrew has asked, how does Windows recall impact this conversation? Will applications have access to the data stored by this feature?
So Windows, and I don't know if I've dug into it much, but my understanding of Windows recall is it essentially allows you to...
Basically a glorified keylogger and screen capture. It's fundamentally malware. It just captures everything you do.
Okay. So when you have this enabled, so in this case, I've said 7-zip cannot trigger any other application on my computer, which means if it tried to start Windows recall, it tried to start PowerShell, it would say it cannot do that. Windows recall is not a bad thing to block either, any kind of keylogger that you've got built into your system.
It also only runs on ARM.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. An agent for which is in development and should be available, hopefully soon.
I think development's in testing. We're past development stage.
Yes.
So it's in testing.
Zach actually made a really good suggestion, which is we should put the quote, when hackers sleep, we sleep, on a t-shirt. Excellent idea, Zach.
We never sleep though.
Aaron has asked, can you briefly explain what you said about port blocking again?
Network control essentially is a firewall, so you can block ports. But one of the big challenges with blocking ports is you can't, say I have an Active Directory server, I can't shut down all my Active Directory ports because somebody won't be able to log in because they need to see those ports open. And the IP addresses are issued dynamically by my Active Directory server. And I could do this on the internet as well. With ThreatLocker, you can actually allow certain ports, whether it's Active Directory, whether it's RDP, whether it's, please don't publish RDP publicly, but whether it's an RD gateway published publicly. But if you did open up, say, an RD gateway on the internet, you could go in here and say, I'm going to allow a certain port, but I'm only going to allow it from my devices. And what the dynamic ACLs do is they track the IP addresses of all your devices and open and close the ports based on the location of your devices.
Jesse has asked, do you have a predefined policy for the various applications?
We have lots of predefined policies. And by the way, when you're permitting software, we'll actually show you what those predefined policies are. So we'll say, hey, we have a suggested ring fencing policy, and we'll also turn them on. So if you go into PowerShell, for example, now PowerShell is one of those tools that needs to do a lot for a lot of IT people. So our predefined policies are often based on one glove fits all. You can make them stronger. So if I go into PowerShell here, so we can enable PowerShell full language, or we can enable PowerShell constrained, but in PowerShell full language mode, I can see here out of the box, ThreatLocker stops PowerShell accessing the internet except Office 365 because there's a lot of scripting going on. And
I asked that question as well.
It stops it accessing. And the nice thing is we have some predefined dictionaries, so you don't have to go and add every Office 365 IP address. And it also stops it accessing any of my documents except the list below, which is nothing. And you can make these exceptions. These are on out the box when you first install ThreatLocker. I would recommend you go through the apps that don't have ring fencing policies. So you see these blue shields, it means we've ring fenced them. We haven't ring fenced the registry for this. We can go through and let me just clear this out. And it's a really good idea to start saying, well, obviously Acrobat, we already have a predefined recommended policy, but we could go through any of our policies, even if we've got a custom piece of software. So we could go in my jailbreak software here. That's not good software, but maybe I want to run it because I want to jailbreak my home automation system. So I could go into here and I could say, I want to really limit what this can do. And you should just do this with every software. A really good use case of this, and two really good use cases of this that we really saved someone's ass over ring fencing. One was SolarWinds Orion. The way the SolarWinds Orion backdoor worked was it waited 3 weeks, and after 3 weeks, it reached out to an AWS server. I think it was AWS server, maybe Azure.
In New Jersey.
In New Jersey. I think New Jersey itself should have made it suspicious, but
well, they had a choice. They could either reach out to Russia or reach out to New Jersey, so they picked the dodgier looking one.
So it reached out to New Jersey and it got instruction. When this was switched on, and literally this was in exception because it needs to talk to SolarWinds, it couldn't do that. It literally couldn't reach out. It didn't get instruction. And what could have been a major attack was a foiled exploit. Not because we knew this was a bad server, because nobody knew this was a bad server. It was a US-based server, be it New Jersey. And it was, I apologize for everyone from New Jersey on the call. It was not enough data there to indicate an indicator of compromise. But just because it wasn't needed, by turning that on, we're able to foil that exploit. The Exchange vulnerability, and if anyone didn't see the pure scale of that, people often think, oh, Exchange was exploited, they can get into our mailboxes, which is really bad. It was actually much worse than that. When the Exchange server was exploited, the attacker was able to push out a GPO to the entire organization to deploy ransomware. By ring fencing IIS, we stopped that happening immediately. Now, if you didn't ring fence IIS and you were using allow listing, the ransomware got blocked. But just by ring fencing IIS and saying, I don't want this program to do more than it needs to, they couldn't download, they couldn't call PowerShell, they couldn't create the GPO. And these are really, really important things. So if you are using ThreatLocker, just go in, have a look at your applications, pick 5 applications a week. It's a 5-minute process to turn it on and a 15-minute process to review it in a week's time. Go through and say, I don't want it to do this, this, and this. Put the policy in monitor-only mode, and a week later, do a simulation. It'll tell you, were my assumptions correct?
1 or 2 other questions. So Carlton Whitmore has asked, we're protecting endpoints with webroot secure anywhere, and we've never had an issue. Do you have a comparison doc between endpoint AV and the capabilities of ThreatLocker?
We do have a comparison doc, and I'm not saying that you will never get any, you will necessarily have an issue, but
well, I would, because it all comes down to known versus unknown. So obviously WebRoot is dependent on knowing everything that is bad. I think the evidence would suggest that it is not possible to know everything that is bad. I have code sitting on my machine here that I got from ChatGPT, which is basically a reverse shell.
And we have, yeah, and that's true. The problem is antivirus tries to determine if a program is good or bad based on either a known signature or intent. And the problem is with not intent or behavior.
Behavior, yeah.
So if a program is doing something bad, is that good behavior or bad behavior? But what is the difference between a piece of software that takes your data and uploads it to the internet for backup purposes, or a piece of software that takes your data and uploads it to the internet for exfiltration purposes? The reality is, more often than not, you're not getting hit by ransomware is more to do with the users didn't click on anything or you didn't have an open port than anything else. And a perfect example of this, I'm not going to say who, but take the MGM. You think the MGM aren't using the highest end, most quality EDRs in the world? I mean, they make more money from me to buy their EDR in the 5 trips we have to do to Vegas a year. And the bottom line is you take a scenario like that, they got hit, but then the next guy will say, yeah, we were running X EDR and we've never been hit. The bottom line is at some point, someone's going to run something that isn't on a list. And we've done a whole demonstrations on AI generated malware and things to demonstrate that. Another point is, let's just say somebody calls you and says, hey, I'm calling from your IT department. Can you, or Microsoft, can you please run TeamViewer? That's neither good or bad. But if you don't use TeamViewer, why would you allow it to run? And that type of things happens. I want to
another very quickly to answer Carlton's question. Micah said, I got ThreatLocker because I had malware sail right through WebRoot. And another person, August, has said WebRoot doesn't have any anti-tamper, so it's pretty easy to uninstall. So there's 2 other reasons for you.
Okay, so I think what we're gonna finish out, because we do have to get out of the office. I'm gonna show one PowerShell script as a good example. We did a thing last year or the year before in Dublin. We put, if you know what rubber ducky is a USB device. It acts as a keyboard. When you plug it in, it can send keystrokes. So we had a rubber ducky, and we made a deal. Whoever's computer we plug this into, and it doesn't steal their data, we're going to fly you to Florida to Zero Trust World for 2 days. I'm going to show you, teach you how to hack. We're going to pay for your hotels. We're going to do everything fully comped, take you backstage, 15 people in a row, one after the other. The first guy comes up and says, my CISO said it's impossible. We're running CrowdStrike. We block USB ports. We plugged in the rubber ducky. He didn't block USB ports. He blocked USB drives. Just to be clear, we exfilled his data. And this is the script we used on the rubber ducky. This is basically taking PowerShell, making a hidden window, putting it in a hidden window, and uploading all the files on my computer. And if you were to take this and run it on WebRoot, it will let it run and it will let you exfil the data.
Craig did ask a really good question, which is, why are you in your office in the path of a hurricane?
So the hurricane is a little bit away from us now. The recommendation from Orange County, where we are in Orlando, is that we be at home by 2 p.m., which is why we've closed. We haven't completely closed the office, but it is a hurricane category 4 rated building. We do have backup generators and backup power. It's probably safer than my house, but I will be going to my house because I still have kids and I need to be at my house. But we will be leaving very, very soon to ensure that.
Just one answer or question I think you will want to answer, Danny. Application whitelisting is an old concept but never got popularity. Why do you think ThreatLocker will get success?
So it's interesting that you say will get success, or I think.
Why do you think I asked you?
So the answer to that, first of all, has had success. ThreatLocker now protects over 48,000 companies, and they range from parts of the US Navy, JetBlue, massive airports, which I won't say the names of, to hospitals, to banks, and down to small companies. ThreatLocker has been so successful because whitelisting, first of all, whitelisting is one part of our solution, but 98% of our customers successfully deploy and manage their whitelisting solutions. And we also have the highest retention in any cybersecurity product on customer renewals. And the reason being is because when you buy ThreatLocker as a whitelisting solution, we don't just list a bunch of DLLs and hashes and say these work. We track every update, every Windows update, every Office update, every Chrome update, 45,000 applications we have data on. And it's really about the things behind it and not the tool itself of whitelisting. In addition to that, it's not just whitelisting. If I said to you, just go and buy whitelisting, but you don't have ring fencing, you don't have network controls, you don't have our EDR in place, you're buying a really important security platform, but it's not one part of a platform. I think the reason you'll see we've been so successful at this where everybody else hasn't is because when we started ThreatLocker, we didn't say, here's a piece of software. We have 120 people in ThreatLocker labs that do nothing but track software updates all day. So when you have a policy for Office or Chrome or Windows, they make sure that the new version always continues to run for you and for the rest of our customers.
To highlight that point, Andy has said, I wanted to allow list for years. ThreatLocker is the first solution I've seen that makes it doable. I love it when attendees answer other attendees' questions. It just makes our job so much easier.
And I'll ask one more question. Do you think we'll ever have the ability to detect in-memory exploits? We do detect in-memory exploits with ThreatLocker Detect. And we also, and I think part of the in-memory thing gets confusing because a lot of code, a lot of malware will run and then it will inject into a separate process. So it will attach itself to a separate process and it will say, I'm going to spin up, do malicious code under explorer.exe. So you're not going to see that exploit. And the way that EDR works is it will look for those cross applications and process attaching, which is exactly what we'll do. Hey, something attached to this process, and that will detect in-memory exploits. But quite often we don't. The reason we get less alarms is because by blocking the ability to execute to begin with, they can't get the foothold to attach to memory. We also look at the behavior of the applications. So ring fencing essentially does more to in-memory exploits than our detection or any detection for in-memory exploits, because in-memory exploits are looking for known patterns of behaviors at a memory level, and we are monitoring that with ThreatLocker Detect. But the ring fencing does more because it's saying that we expect this to be exploited, but let's limit what it can do. So if it steps outside of its lane, it's not going to be able to do anything. So we have built-in known in-memory exploitation detection in our EDR, but in addition to that, we're stopping most of those exploits by limiting what the application can do in the first place.
We did a webinar the other day with a guy called Jacoby. He's like Hack5's Hacker of the Year for 5 years in a row or something. The guy's a genius. And he's made this polymorphic PowerShell reverse shell. So basically reaches out to an API, and every time it gets back a different piece of PowerShell that basically is a reverse shell. Doesn't get picked up by any AV, any EDR, nothing that sees this happening. And he tried it in the machine with ThreatLocker, and we blocked it because ring fencing, basically. And he couldn't believe it. He was like, they must be doing some sort of, advanced in-memory detection, behavioral-based analysis. I was like, no, we're just stopping PowerShell from accessing the internet. Ring fencing, pure and simple.
We do have a conference in February in Orlando, a time of year in Orlando where there are 0 hurricanes, and it's beautiful weather, 70 degrees all year round. For those in Europe, 20 degrees. I'm converting roughly. So beautiful weather, clear blue skies, but most importantly, it's a really good educational 3 days. We're going to teach you how to hack, how to write exploits, how to use Metasploit, how to use rubber duckies. We're going to show you how to secure things. We've got sessions on hardening Windows, very hands-on. Most conferences you go to, you sit and listen to a guy talking for 20 minutes, humming and hawing, pacing him back on the stage. That's normally me, the one who's pacing him backwards on stage. We actually have in our lab, we have 1,000 laptops, and we literally reset them and set labs up and show you how to do it. You can get certified in ThreatLocker on site. And if you do get certified, you get a refund of your Zero Trust World Pass. It's not easy. You have to study, you have to take the test. We do boot camps. And of course, like every cool IT event, it has a really great party. So we can't talk about our entire platform in 37 minutes. It was supposed to be 30. We do appreciate everyone taking the time today. And Rob, thank you for coming out. And again, everyone who is based in Florida, please try and keep safe during the hurricane. And we're going to be here continue to operate throughout. We've got people out of state, so we will continue to provide services. Hopefully we don't lose our building tomorrow, but if we do, we have backups and contingencies in place. So again, thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Danny.
And apologies for everyone who didn't get to answer the chat for.
Well, I love that, Jeffrey. I know I sleep better since we got ThreatLocker.
Good ending. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.